They never called themselves assassins. No grand title, no guild etched in legend, no crest stitched upon a cloak. He offered him a pouch. Inside were 6 silver rings. Yours, he said, if you forget what you saw. He did not sleep that night. Then he added, more, if you do what I do. The man had slit a merchant's throat. He hadn't known Leoric, watched. But Leoric made a mistake, he gasped. That gasp changed everything. Not a child, but young enough to have a mother who would weep. Leoric was told he was a spy. He was told he was dangerous. He was told nothing at all. Really just given a vial of oil, a name, and the time he'd be alone near the fishmonger's gate. Not from remorse, he had already lost most of that, but from the knowledge that he had crossed a line no map could chart. He was no longer a man who might steal. He was a man who had killed, quietly, cleanly, on command. Or perhaps someone whispered his name one night, across a different table, and another blade had found its way to his back. The oil was to silence the hinges. Leoric followed him into the rain. He followed him into a cellar beneath a bakery. He followed him into silence. Sometimes it was a merchant who knew too much. Sometimes a baron's mistress who had said too much. Sometimes a rival priest who prayed to the wrong god. Leoric never asked why. Not after the 3rd job. Questions had teeth. Answers had no mercy. And a final offering to the church who preached suffering was holy. His fingers bore scars, not from battle, but from too tight knots and misjudged leaps. His only luxury was silence, and even that was fragile. She was blind in one eye, had a laugh like chimes in winter, and poured tea too strong. She kissed him without asking his name. He stayed 3 weeks. On the last night, she asked what he feared most. He said, remembering. In every village, some child would ask, what do you do? And Leoric would smile, small and broken, and say, I mend nets, or I read dreams. You did not drink where you worked. You never returned to the same town twice, unless you meant to bury someone there. But Leoric made his own. Never children, never those who begged, never for pleasure, and never twice in the same town. He changed his name often, sometimes Leor, sometimes Rin. He dreamed often, not of those he killed, but of those who paid, their faces blurred, their eyes always dry. Once, simply the cobbler's cousin. In such a place, crime wasn't a temptation, it was a necessity. Bread stolen was better than bones broken by hunger. A priest's name, Father Hadrian of Kale's Hollow. But the coin left for him was strange, old, foreign, and heavy. Only the desperate, the vengeful, the quietly enraged knew how to find him. They sent notes through candle vendors and innkeepers, scribbled in soap or ink, made of boiled wine and soot. They never signed, he never refused, but every job etched something deeper into him, like a chisel on stone. And so, Leoric learned, would come back to speak. But history remembers the tremble in a baronessed hand as he reads a name etched into his bread crust. History remembers the way a judge's carriage never reached the courthouse. It remembers the absence, even if it forgets the cause. He learned how to vanish in alleys, how to pry open latches with a bent spoon, how to tell which doors housed the weak, and which ones hid blades. In truth, they were shadows given shape by desperation. The truth was rot and fever and filth. There were nights he sat in privies for hours just to avoid being seen. The son of a mason and a laundress, his childhood was filled with the scrape of stone, the steam of kettles, and the laughter of a sister who would never live to see 13 winters. Disease came early to the town and often, and it did not ask permission. By the time Leoric reached manhood, the only sound that accompanied him was the ache of an empty stomach and the rustle of wind over graves that held too many he knew by name. Cragmore had no lord, no banners, no feasts. It had taxes, though, and bribes. But petty theft was not a calling. It was survival. The killer's name was Irvin, and he did not kill Leoric. Leoric did not answer. He took the pouch. But on the third, when Irvin returned with another name, another pouch, and the same quiet look in his eyes, no one trained Leoric. There was no mentor, no sacred creed, no ancient order, only practice and pain, but only for a moment. He did not remember the face afterward, only the warmth of blood on his wrist. Irvin paid him 12 silver coins. Leoric could not stop shaking. That was the only training he ever needed. In time, Irvin disappeared. Perhaps he was caught. Perhaps he ran. Leoric survived because he learned quickly that surviving meant not being known. You did not boast. Cloaked figures on rooftops, eyes glowing with justice, blades kissed by moonlight. There were no ballads sung about that. His back ached more than it should have for a man not yet 30. No one ever believed him. Once, in the town of Heribridge, he met a girl named Sira. He left before the sun rose. Once, he broke that last rule. It cost him 3 ribs and a friend. He never broke it again. They say history forgets men like Leoric. That may be true. Leoric became an absence, and that, more than fame, kept him alive. But absence is not peace. Not because they blurred together, but because counting implied an end. He knew better. The last job he took before the fall came wrapped in white cloth, not a note, just a name carved into bone. A strange thing. Leoric had never worked in the Hollow E. Didn't want to start. Heavy meant desperate, and desperate jobs were dangerous. Still, Leoric accepted. And so he went, not knowing that Kale's Hollow would be the place where all the silence he had built, all the ghosts he had carried, and all the truths he had buried, and they would not whisper. Kale's Hollow did not appear on most maps. When it did, it was drawn small, slightly crooked, as if the cartographer's hand trembled while scratching its name. It was not a village of renown, nor one of trade. It was tucked between 2 hills, where mist liked to linger, and the sun seemed reluctant to stay. A river ran past it, a thin, silver threadened. A forest curled around its edges like fingers guarding a secret. Leoric arrived just before dusk, when the light was softest, and everything looked a little more like a memory than reality. No candle, no mirror, that was fine. Leoric did not like mirrors. He wore the face of a traveling mason this time, his beard thick with ash, his tunic dusted in limestone powder. Its roof bore moss like a crown. Its wooden cross hung crooked. No one posted guards at a chapel, but he had seen stranger things. He'd seen holy men with knives hidden in prayer books. He'd seen altars carved hollow to store vials of venom. But the bell tower was intact, and from it came a pale golden light, faint but constant. His tools were false, but his gait was convincing. Years of pretending left him with many bodies, many walks, many eyes that could flicker between alertness and apathy in a blink. The first thing he noticed in Kale's Hollow was how quiet it was. Not peaceful quiet, but brittle. The kind that made birds stop singing too early, and made children play with one eye on the tree line. There was tension in his posture, like a man holding breath in his spine. His robe was plain, stained near the hem. His hands were covered in ash. His eyes were pale, not blind, but emptied of something. Hope, perhaps, or time. She asked no questions. That alone told him everything. In places like this, people asked questions, not out of suspicion, but from hunger for news, for stories from beyond the mist. The fact that she asked nothing meant she already suspected more than she wanted to know. Symbols etched with it, runes old and broken, some smeared, some precise. The chapel pews had been pushed to the sides, creating a strange clearing in the center, where a figure sat alone, head bowed, hands motionless, not through the door, but through the window, landing silent as a feather among weeds. The townsfolk moved like people, waiting for something to break a dam, a rule, a person, and every head turned a beat too long when he passed. At the inn, if it could be called that, a 3-room hovel with one drunkard asleep before the fire. The woman behind the counter barely looked at him. He gave the name Tolan. She gave him a key carved from antler. His room was upstairs. The bed was straw and not fresh. A single window faced the forest. He waited until night fully settled, until the village ceased its breath, and the only sound was the rhythm of wind against roof tiles. Then he slipped out. The chapel stood at the edge of Kale's Hollow, leaning slightly as if it too wished to leave. Leoric approached with care. The door was ajar. He stepped inside, and the scent hit him. Not incense, not rot, salt. There was salt strewn across the floor in wide, deliberate circles. Father Hadrian Leoric watched from the shadows. The priest did not stir. He was old, yes, but not fragile. Leoric said nothing. He simply stepped forward, the wood creaking once. Father Hadrian did not startle. He raised his head slowly, revealing a face lined not only with age, but with secrets. And something moved beneath the floorboards, not wood, not mice, but something slow and old and waiting. I was wondering how long it would take them to send someone, he said. His voice was dry, but not unkind. They want me sealed, again, but it's too late for that. Leoric remained still. I assume you've come for me, the priest asked, tilting his head slightly. Leoric did not confirm. He never did. Confirmation had weight. Father Hadrian sighed, long and low. They never understand what they fear, just that it must be ended. Leoric reached beneath his cloak, not for a blade, but for the token he had received, the bone shard with the carved name. He held it out. The priest looked at it, then laughed. A quiet, bitter thing. They sent you with that. He shook his head. Do you know what it is? Leoric did not answer. Of course not. You're just the hand, not the eye, not the mouth. The priest stood, slowly, every movement careful, measured. That's not my name, he said. It's what they called me before the hollow, before the salt. Leoric felt something stir beneath his skin, a prickle, not of danger, but of unraveling. The job was wrong. He knew that now. Why me? The priest asked softly. Why now? Leoric remained silent, but the priest didn't wait. He stepped over one of the salt lines. His foot brushed it. The line broke, and in that instant, Leoric felt the air shift. It was not wind, it was presence. The chapel grew colder. The shadows grew longer. Father Hadrian looked him in the eye. They don't want me dead, assassin, he whispered. Outside, the wind howled, the trees bent, and a single bell rang not the chapel's, but a deeper one, from somewhere beneath the soil. Leoric stepped back. Father Hadrian stepped forward. "The real question is not whether you can kill me," he said. "It's whether you should." Leoric's hand hovered near his dagger. But for the first time in years, he hesitated. Because, for the first time in years, he did not feel like the most dangerous thing in the room. Something beneath the chapel shifted again. The salt symbols sparked faintly, as if remembering something, as if warning. And from outside came a voice, faint, not human, calling his name. Not Tolan, not Rin, Leoric, a name he had not spoken aloud in 7 years. He turned, heart pounding, eyes scanning the dark, but there was nothing. Only wind, only mist, only the knowing smile of a priest who was not supposed to know his name. The name had not been spoken, no lips had moved, but Leoric had heard it. Not with ears, but in the marrow of his bones, in the spaces between heartbeats, a whisper shaped like memory, like guilt. The chapel seemed smaller now, though nothing had changed in its walls or windows. What had shifted was within him. Father Hadrian watched him, not with fear, but with something quieter. Recognition, perhaps, or pity. "You hear it, don't you?" the priest murmured. Leoric didn't reply. His hand gripped the edge of the pew nearest to him, though he hadn't meant to reach out. The wood was damp, and his fingers came away stained with soot. This is where they bury the things they want forgotten. Excuses had no place here. Not when your name was whispered by wind that had no voice. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice low, more gravel than tone, to vanish into the trees and disappear once more into the vast silence of the forgotten. But another part of him, smaller and older, rooted him in place, and he had stepped over it. He had broken the line. "The hollow," Hadrian said with a faint smile. "It was never just a village, not even in the beginning." Leoric stared at the salt lines again. They weren't random. They formed a pattern, an ancient ring of containment, cracked in places, faded in others. He had let something out. "No one told me this was more than a man," Leoric said, though the words tasted hollow. "Once, in another name, in another place. This story was never meant to have you in it." "They wouldn't," Hadrian replied. "They never do. Easier to send a blade than a question." Leoric moved slowly, circling the edge of the runes now, careful not to brush them again. His instincts screamed at him to leave, to run. "They said you were a priest," Leoric said. "I was," Hadrian answered. "What happened?" I remembered. The priest said simply. They turned inward, to the way the name had called to him, not summoned, not threatened. And with that, he knelt again, hands placed calmly in his lap. But this thing beneath the chapel remembered, and Warsit recognized. "You should leave," he added, not unkindly. Not what he was, but what the hollow truly held. Everyone here knew. That's why they looked away. That's why no one had welcomed him. Leoric frowned. "I don't leave without finishing the job." "Then you're already dead," Hadrian replied. A silence stretched between them. Then, softly, Leoric asked, "What's beneath the chapel?" He studied the signs, the way doors were marked with ash, the small bundles of herbs hung near chimneys, the bowls of milk left untouched at thresholds. These were not superstitions. The priest's eyes flicked toward the floor. Not what, who. Leoric waited, but Hadrian gave no name. Outside, the wind grew still. Not calm waiting. It sings at night, like bones in a river. And in the quiet that followed, Leoric's thoughts turned not to knives or poisons or tricks of the trade. Called, there was power in a name. He had changed his so many times that the one he was born with felt like a story told by someone else. He returned to the inn that night, but did not sleep. The innkeeper's eyes were too wide, her questions too absent. She knew, he realized, because they'd seen others arrive and vanish. In the morning, he walked the village, not as a stranger, but as a watcher. They were offerings, and the people moved like tenants, not owners. This was not their home. The floor groaned. A trapdoor opened not with hinges, but with a sigh. A long, deep breath of cold air and old dust. It was their prison, not for them, for something else. In the town square, a girl, no older than 10, tugged at his sleeve. She had red string in her hand. "Are you going to stop the noise?" she asked. Leoric knelt slowly, studying her face. "What noise?" "The one that hums in the dirt," she said. In the center lay a slab. Upon it, a figure. She tied the red string around his wrist. Before he could stop her, "For luck," she said, "or for remembering." Its face was neither man nor woman, but something between, and on its forehead a mark the same as the one carved on the bone Leoric had received. Then she walked away. That night, Leoric returned to the chapel. Father Hadrian was waiting, seated in the same place, his hands stained with charcoal, his eyes unreadable, but it has forgotten that name. Now it only answers to the ones who remember. "You stayed," the priest said. "I've never left a job undone," Leoric replied. The priest nodded. "Then you should know. The thing they fear isn't what I am, it's what I remember." Leoric's fingers traced the edge of the dagger hidden beneath his cloak. "Show me," he said. Hadrian stood, slower this time. He walked to the altar, reached beneath it, and pulled a rusted chain. Leoric descended first, not because he trusted the priest, but because something beneath was calling, still soft, still low, but louder than before. The stairs were stone, slick with moss. The air grew colder, thicker, and then the chamber opened around him. It was not a crypt. It was not a tomb. It was a room of stone and iron, ringed with chains and symbols, not dead. Its chest rose and fell slowly. Its skin was pale, translucent, webbed with veins of gold. He turned to the priest. "What is it?" "It was once called Aelreth," Hadrian said. Leoric took a step closer. The figure's eyes opened. They were black. And then it smiled. It was not a human smile. Leoric had seen many in his life smiles of merchants hiding deceit, of killers hiding blades, of children hiding stolen apples. This was none of those. It was wide, too still, without tension at the corners, as if the face did not fully understand how muscles were meant to move, only that a smile was expected. Just motion graceful, fluid, and wrong in ways the body should not move. Its eyes did not blink, its gaze fixed directly on Leoric, and though it said nothing, a word lodged itself in his mind like a splinter of ice. But the weight of purpose, of something deeper than coin and contracts, rooted his feet to the cold stone. Then the thing on the stone slab sat up. It made no sound, no gasp, no breath drawn return. "You who have erased your name 100 times, who wears masks made of silence and lies. And yet here, beneath the hollow, something knows you." Leoric did not move. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. Father Hadrian stepped forward, his voice barely audible. "It remembers you." "That's impossible," Leoric replied, his throat tight. "Is it?" the priest said softly. The creature it could not be called anything else rose to its feet, always with that same cold light, always with something waiting in the center, and a voice not unlike this one saying things he could never remember upon waking. It was tall, taller than it looked lying down, its form stretched like light through stained glass. Its fingers ended in faintly glowing nails, not clawed, but sharp, and its hair fell around its shoulders like black oil. Still, it did not speak aloud. Instead, its presence moved, as if a second voice existed behind the veil of sound, one that pressed into the bones rather than ears. "Return," it whispered again, without lips. Leoric took a step back. "I don't know you," he said. But part of him wondered, because the dreams, the ones he had pushed away for years, had always taken place in a chamber like this. The creature took a step forward, and Leoric's dagger was in his hand. He didn't raise it. 100 images bloomed behind his eyes, flickers of firelight, forests at night, a tower of ash, and a name carved into stone with his own hand. "Not yet. I was sent to kill a priest," he said, more to himself than anyone. Not this," Father Hadrian's voice echoed faintly from behind. "Then ask yourself, who sent you? And what did they really want dead?" The creature's head tilted. Another step forward. And then, still without speaking, it raised one hand and pressed it lightly to Leoric's chest. Leoric could not breathe, not from pressure or pain. From memory, his heart stuttered. Not from fear, but from recognition. Not Leoric, not Rin, not Tolan, but another name, older. The first agreement between those who walked the land and those who dreamed beneath it. Buried. A name he had once sworn never to speak again. He collapsed to his knees, gasping, clutching at something that was not there. It traced a line along one, and the symbol shimmered with dull light. The creature pulled back, still silent, still watching. Hadrian knelt beside him, steadying his shoulders. "You were not sent to kill a priest," he said. "You were sent to bury a truth." Leoric stared at the floor, vision blurred. "What is it?" he asked. Hadrian looked at the creature, then at Leoric. "Not by them." He gestured upward, toward the world above. "By it. It is what remains of the old pact," the priest said. Behind it, the shadows in the room began to stretch, not lengthen, but deepen, as if the room was growing, not wider, but older. Leoric's breathing slowed. "What does it want?" "That you're just a man with a blade and a job, but you'll never truly forget again." The creature moved to the edge of the room, where the stone walls were carved with symbols too ancient to read. "It wants return, but not return to a place. Return to a time. You were there," Hadrian whispered. "You helped seal it away." Leoric shook his head. "No, that's not possible." The creature turned back toward him. In its eyes, a storm of stars. "You lived other lives," Hadrian said, "long before this one. And something in you remembers. That's why you were chosen." The dagger felt heavy in Leoric's hand. He stood slowly. The creature did not follow. Instead, it closed its eyes, and the light in the chamber dimmed. "You can still walk away," Hadrian said. "You can pretend this is a dream." Leoric nodded once, slowly, then turned toward the stairs. Not to flee, to breathe, to think, to choose. Above ground, the night was still. The innkeeper did not ask where he'd been. The sky held no stars, the red string still wrapped around his wrist. And as he lay on the straw bed, still fully clothed, his eyes did not close, because now he remembered what the voice had said in the chamber, not with words, but with meaning. Not return in the way he had first understood, but return to what was broken. Return to who he once was. Return to finish what he had begun. When morning came, it brought no warmth. The sun rose, as it always did, but its light felt thin, strained, as if passing through something heavy. Mist clung to the fields like breath that refused to exhale, and the village of Kale's Hollow moved through the day, not in routine, but in ritual. Doors opened briefly, then shut. No voices called, no animals stirred. The path was no longer barred, but it was thick with implication. The thing below Aelreth had not moved again. It was the kind of quiet that made Leoric feel watched, though no one met his gaze. He stood at the edge of the woods, just past the last cottage, listening, not to the wind, not to the river's churn, but to something deeper, something humming just beyond hearing, like a tune buried in his ribs. He had not spoken to Father Hadrian since the night before. He hadn't returned to the chapel. On the fourth round, he noticed a path barely more than a trace in the grass leading up a slight incline toward the ruins of a stone structure, but it still moved in thought. It had touched something in him, and now that thread was tugging. Leoric rubbed the red string on his wrist. He should have removed it, but he couldn't, not yet. He walked the perimeter of the village 3 times that day, circling like a hound tracking a scent. The villagers did not look at it. They did not walk near it. That alone was reason enough for Leoric to climb. But the air around it was heavy, not with dust, but with memory. Symbols carved long ago were now half devoured by moss. As he passed beneath the crumbling arch, a gust of wind moved through the stone. The structure had once been a watchtower, perhaps, or a shrine, its shape to warn, to tell, but not the same, older. He stood in the center of the ruin and closed his eyes. The path twisted, like it tried to forget itself. After some time, they reached a clearing where stone pillars stood like teeth around a pool of black water. A vision bloomed brief, burning, flashes of fire, chains of light, a field of bones, a gate, a vow. He staggered back. Someone had stood here before, someone wearing his shape but bearing another name. He opened his eyes to find an old man watching from the trees, thin, barefoot, eyes clouded, not by blindness, but by knowing. The man gestured, "Follow," so he did. They walked through trees deeper than Leoric had gone before. The man spoke. They built it to remember. Leoric stepped closer. "What?" "This," the old man said. "What was sealed, what was bargained, what was broken." He knelt, dipping a hand into the pool. The surface rippled, reflected not sky, but stars. "Your face was different," the man said, "but the eyes were the same." Leoric stared into the pool. He saw a version of himself. Black steel armor, pale blade, kneeling, weeping. When others wanted, it ended. You sealed it away, alone, with part of yourself as the lock. Before a door of stone and fire, he pulled back. "What did I do?" "You will. You weren't sent to kill the priest. You were called to answer." "Answer for what?" The man straightened. "For mercy. Mercy. You spared it, Aelreth." Leoric shook his head. "That doesn't make sense." A long silence. "Why now?" Leoric asked. "Because it's waking, and it wants to remember, and if it does, then so must the world." Leoric returned to the village just before dusk. This time, the people did not look away. They watched him. But it's stronger when the one who made it stands at the threshold, with hope or fear or both. That night, he returned to the chapel. Father Hadrian was waiting. "It spoke to me again," Leoric said. The priest nodded. "And it remembers mercy." A pause. "Will you offer it again?" Hadrian asked. Leoric thought of the stone chamber, the pool of stars, the trembling blade. "I don't know. The seal is breaking," Hadrian said. "With or without you?" Leoric descended again. The thing was waiting, no longer lying down. It stood, and it too remembered. The chamber was colder than before, not with the damp of stone, but with something more ancient, a chill that clung not to the skin, but to the soul, whispering of a presence that had been dormant for centuries and was now beginning to stir. The iron chains lining the walls quivered slightly, moved by no visible force, but by memory, memory that breathed through iron and stone like a forgotten wind. Aelreth stood in the center of the room, no longer lying in stillness, but upright, composed. Its hands were clasped before it, not in submission, but in a kind of solemn readiness. He held nothing in his hands, no weapon, no offering, only questions. Torchlight flickered off its skin, which shimmered faintly as if dusted with frost and starlight. The eyes, those deep, endless wells of black fixed, unblinking on Leoric as he approached. Leoric stopped just a pace away. Sigils etched into the walls flared with a dull light, like eyes opening after a long sleep. And somewhere deep in Leoric's mind, something unfolded, like pages turned in a book he had not known he carried. And the breath that came was not air, but sound, a low, resonant hum filled with weight, depth, and age. It was not a voice, but a song half sung and half wept, a sound that shaped the air. "You remember," he said. Aelreth inclined its head, slow and deliberate. At the center, Aelreth, not frail, not calm, but burning with terrible light, radiant and bloodied. It knelt, hands empty, though it had just wielded power enough to crack the sky. Leoric, not named Leoric then, but shaped the same, had stood over it with sword drawn. Then it opened its mouth, not to speak, to breathe. The chamber responded. Stone pulsed faintly beneath their feet. Not memory, a moment. He stood upon a high cliff. Behind him, a tower broken by time. Below, a battlefield torn by magic and steel. Time folded in on itself. The air was thick with echoes. Leoric could feel the weight of ages pressing inward. Resting in its palm was a shard of crystal black, laced with veins of silver. It pulsed like a quiet heartbeat. He saw flashes again, robed figures bleeding onto stones, kings kneeling before the altar, and himself, his other self once again, lowering that same blade, and had lowered the blade. "You begged me not to destroy you," he whispered. "Your promise, made visible. Your mercy, given form." Aelreth stepped forward. Its voice came not in sound, but through the room, through Leoric's bones. "And you agreed." From the edge of the chamber, Father Hadrian watched, unmoving, his expression unreadable. "Why?" Leoric asked. The word was raw. The shard thrummed gently, and something stirred within him in response. A warmth, a recognition, a grief. Aelreth tilted its head slightly. "Because I remembered what you had forgotten, that not all old things are evil, that not all broken things must be buried. The seal forged not from chains, but from the self." Leoric's hands tightened. "You said you could change, that exile would be enough." "I was wrong," Aelreth said. Silence grew heavy between them. "And now, I am still wrong, but I am awake." Leoric took a step back, his instincts flaring. "Then this is a trick." It opened, not flame. He dropped to one knee, gasping as the shard vanished into his chest. "No, this is a reckoning." The chains along the walls snapped with ringing force. Sigils blazed like stars. And above them, in the chapel, a bell rang, once no hand upon it, no rope drawn. Again, the room shifted not in shape or size, but in feeling. Aelreth extended its hand. "You left this with me. Aelreth said. Leoric stared, then slowly reached out. What is it? A piece of you, Aelreth answered. The cost of the seal. His fingers hovered above it, and then he remembered. Not all, but enough. The moment of choice. The blade withheld. He was the key. You want it finished, he said. Aelreth nodded. No more chains. No more silence. Let memory return. Leoric grasped the shard. It burned, not with fire, but with truth. Every kill, every flight, every false name and sleepless night unspooled inside him. 1,000 lives lived under other shadows. The chamber flared with light. Father Hadrian stepped forward at last. So, he said, voice soft, you've chosen. Leoric looked up, eyes rimmed with tears. I didn't choose. I remembered. Beneath Aelreth, the stone cracked, but it did not break. From below, golden light poured upward. Not heat, life, not the end. The release. Aelreth turned to him. You may follow. Leoric's voice was a whisper. Where to what was promised. Then Aelreth stepped into the light and was gone. The glow dimmed. The chamber quieted. The chains hung loose. Leoric remained there, kneeling, breathing. Hadrian joined him, lowering himself to the stone. You sealed it. You unsealed it. The world won't thank you. Leoric let out a rough, dry laugh. It never did. What now? Hadrian asked. Leoric looked to the cracked floor, still warm with fading light. Now, he said, I think I'll listen to what else I've forgotten. And somewhere above, beyond the chapel, beyond the sky, over Kael's hollow, the long mist began to lift. The mist didn't vanish entirely. It rose, shifted, and thin like a veil hesitant to let go. But it no longer clung to the village the way it had before. The sun was pale but visible. The village felt unfamiliar, though every path was known, every corner unchanged. He stood at the chapel steps, not to look at the people, but to feel the space they inhabited, what was missing, what remained. It hovered, instead, cautious, as if uncertain of its own purpose, now that the thing beneath the chapel had left. Leoric emerged from the chapel slow-footed, as if climbing from a grave that had once belonged to him. They watched him, not with awe, not with fear, but with questions. Eyes peered from window slats and door cracks. A few brave ones stood fully in the street. The butcher, the boy who sold eggs, the girl who had tied red string to his wrist. He still wore it. She waved. His body felt heavier, not with pain, but with time, like someone who had carried a dream too long, only to find it real and twice as heavy. He raised a hand, but did not smile. He had no smiles left this morning, only echoes. Father Hadrian emerged behind him and closed the chapel door softly. He wore no robes now, just a simple coat, threadbare at the cuffs. I told them nothing, he said quietly. They know enough, Leoric replied. But up the hill behind the village, the one crowned with the ruin where he had seen the pool of stars, he descended the steps, each one slower than the last. What happens now? Hadrian asked, walking beside him. Leoric didn't answer right away. They passed the inn. The door was open. The innkeeper gave a small nod, nothing more. Now, Leoric said at last, now I remember. He turned onto the old north path, the one that led not toward the forest or the road. Hadrian followed without question. The climb was quiet. The mist below wrapped the village in silver threads, soft as breath. The ruin felt different, not sacred, not haunted. A great gate. I remember standing before it with others. I remember we argued, just waiting, not solemn. I said it could be saved, reverent. As they reached the top, the sky opened wider. Leoric stepped into the center, as he had Dazor was at lifetimes before. I was someone else here, he said. You still are, said Hadrian. We made a pact, Aelreth and I. If ever it returned, I would help it walk the path again, this time, not as a prisoner, but as a witness. Leoric knelt and touched the stone. It was warm, as if something beneath still breathed. There was a gate, he said. Hadrian waited. One of them wanted Aelreth destroyed. Another wanted it caged. And he paused, eyes distant. I said no. You saw something in it they couldn't, Hadrian offered. I saw myself, Leoric whispered. The wind stirred the grass. The shard, he continued. It wasn't just a seal. It was a piece of memory. And now that I hold it again, you remember the cost. But what they feared was not a beast. It was a memory, a truth buried beneath stone and silence. A pact older than kingdoms. Leoric nodded. To what? Hadrian asked. To the world it once left. They stood there a while longer, the ruins silent around them. Then Leoric turned. The others, those who sent me, they'll come, they'll try, Hadrian said. I can't hide anymore. No, the priest agreed. But you were never very good at hiding. They returned to the village just as evening fell. People gathered. No one spoke. Leoric stood in the square near the old well. They sent me to kill something they feared, he said, his voice steady, unhurried. He looked at the meech face, marked by struggle, by weather, by generations who had lived with the whisper of something beneath their feet. It is gone now, but I remain, and I remember. The girl with the red string stepped forward. What was it? She asked. Leoric knelt, so they were eye level. A story, he said, that almost ended wrong. But didn't, she asked. He smiled, the first in days. No, not yet. She nodded and walked back to her mother. Hadrian stood at the edge of the square. You'll leave, he said, not as a question. I have to, Leoric replied. They'll be looking for me, and there are others who deserve to know the truth. Where will you go? Everywhere I've been, he said. Everywhere I left my name behind. To warn them, no, he said. To remember them. That night, he packed nothing. He took only the clothes on his back, the blade at his belt, and the memories pressed into his skin like ink that could not be washed away. He passed the boundary stone at the edge of Kale's Hollow as the moon rose, its light unfiltered now. And behind him, the chapel bell rang once more, not in warning, in farewell. The path away from Kale's Hollow was narrow and overgrown, but Leoric walked it without hesitation. No markers guided his way, only instinct tug, not from the mind, but from somewhere deeper. Memory was no longer something passive within him. It had shape now, weight, direction. The world beyond the hollow had not changed. The air was still damp with the season's breath, and the trees loomed tall, gnarled by wind and time. But for Leoric, everything was new. Every crow's call, every crunch of earth beneath his boots, every scent of moss. One path led to Bryn's Skyda town, where he had once gone by the name Joran, and left a mayor's secret buried in the river. The other path wound north, toward the cliffs of Galdreth, where the sea never slept and the wind carried more than mist, and pine whispered of things he had once forgotten. He followed no trail. He made one. 2 days into the journey, he passed a fork in the road. He turned north. The people here were sparse, their speech thick with the salt of the coast. They did not recognize him. He didn't expect them to. I knew you when your hair was gold and your eyes were not so tired. Bryn's Gate would have to wait. Aelreth had once been a place of offerings. Stone cairns dotted its shorelines, piled by hands that remembered ancient gods with no altars. Leoric didn't know why he was drawn there, only that something familiar pulled him onward. On the fourth day, he reached a quiet hamlet tucked into the valley below the cliffs. But one woman stared at him too long. She was old, bent, her eyes milky, and yet when she touched his hand at the village well, she whispered. He froze. She smiled, a thing of sorrow and kindness. "You don't remember me," she said. Below, the sea heaved against rock like a beast kept from breaking free. He reached the top near midnight and found the remnants of a shrine, just 3 standing stones and a shallow depression where fire had once burned. "No," Leoric replied. "But part of you does," she said. "That's enough." She pressed a stone into his hand, smooth, round, etched with a sigil he had seen once, carved above the chapel gate in Kael's Hollow, a spiral within a flame. Time passed not in minutes, but in the soft creaking of thought. He did not sleep. He did not pray. "You left this here once," she said, "to guard something." "What did I guard?" Her presence was not threatening, but sharp, like a blade that had not yet been drawn. She said nothing, but the wind changed with her arrival. She closed his fingers around the stone. "A name." Her voice was low, smooth, and familiar in a way that twisted his ribs. "From the Pact." That night, he climbed the cliffs. The wind screamed, sharp and unrelenting. He sat between them. He lit no flame. Instead, he placed the stone on the ground and waited. The sky was clear. Stars spun above like whispered truths. At some point, a figure stepped from the darkness. She was cloaked in gray, her face hidden beneath a cowl. "You followed me," Leoric said without turning. "I waited," she replied. He turned to face her. "I know you," he said. "Not from this life." "No," she said. "What was your name then?" he asked. She did not answer. Instead, she knelt beside the stone he had placed and touched the symbol with 2 fingers. It glowed faintly. "You still carry it," she said. He nodded. "The shard. It remembers more than you do." I'm starting to see that she looked at him then, fully, eyes dark, but not empty. "You chose mercy," she said, "and it broke everything. I know. They called you coward. I was. They were wrong." He didn't answer. She stood again. "Aelreth walks the old roads," she said, "not to destroy, not to rule, to bear witness." Leoric stood as well. "They'll hunt it. They already are. And me." She smiled. "They don't know who you are anymore. Not yet." He stared at her. "But you do." She nodded. "I was there too," she said. "I chose exile." "Then why return?" "Because the world is beginning to dream again." The stone at their feet pulsed once, then cracked. A thin line split it from edge to edge, light leaking through like a held breath. "They are waking," she said. "The others?" he asked. "All of them." He felt cold. Not from fear, from purpose. "What do I do?" She looked up at the sky. "You remember." Then she turned and walked back into the dark. He stayed until dawn. When the light came, the stone was gone. Only a spiral of ash remained. He descended the cliffs in silence. The next road would not wait long. By the time Leoric reached the old city of Viholmar, the world had changed again. Not visibly, not to the merchant arguing over turnip prices, not to the blacksmith hammering dull red steel into submission, not to the guards who stood at the southern gate, more out of habit than duty. But in the breath between words, in the quiet spaces between cobblestones, something new had taken root. Or rather, something very old had stirred again. but the streets pulsed with life, horses, carts, laughter, and lies. And over it all loomed the tower of the archive, its peak shrouded in mist, no matter the season. He entered the city at twilight. The outer walls were crumbling, their stones veined with moss and forgetfulness. The guards at the archive did not stop him. They looked up, blinked once, and turned away. Leoric walked with purpose, though he carried no sigil of office, no letter of summons. He had walked this path before. Candles flickered in long glass tubes, their flames trapped like memories inside bottles. He passed corridors lined with tomes bound in leather, iron, and sometimes bone. He did not pause. His feet remembered what his mind could not yet hold. Inside, the air was thick with parchment and history. At the top of the third spiral stair, behind a door of green-stained wood, sat the keeper. She had not changed. Her quill scratched across paper with a rhythm as steady as breath. When he entered, she did not look up. Hair the color of ash and copper, skin thin as vellum, eyes that held timelines like fish in a stream. "You were not meant to return," she said, her voice dry as pressed leaves. "I wasn't meant to forget," Leoric replied. At that, she looked up, and her eyes widened. The quill stilled. "You carry it again," he nodded. "The shard, and it speaks, not with words, with memory." She leaned back, the chair creaking like a ship shifting in tide, and Aelreth, and into a chamber, lit only by glyphs carved into the floor-soft green light, pulsing like breath in the dark. "Awake," he said. "Free." She closed her eyes for a long moment, as if mourning something too vast to name. "You'll need the record," she said. "The original," he swallowed. "I thought it was destroyed." "So did I," she said. "But memory is a stubborn archivist." She rose slowly, her bones crackling like ancient bindings. It never stopped writing. As he neared, the pages began to change, shifting to match the tempo of his breath, his heartbeat. "Follow me." They descended to levels, passed through a hidden corridor behind a shelf of blank journals. At the center of the room was a single pedestal. Upon it, a book, unbound. Its pages hovered above the stone like birds in slow flight, ink moving across their surface, not left to write, but in spirals. The keeper approached reverently. "It's alive," she said. Leoric stepped forward. The book did not resist. Then one page stopped. A name appeared. His. Not Leoric, not Joran, not Tolan, but the first name, the true name. He did not speak it. The page did. And the glyphs on the floor flared once, briefly, like a sigh of recognition. The keeper placed a hand on his shoulder. "There were 3, she whispered. 3 who bore the pact." Leoric nodded. "I've found one." She turned her gaze downward. "The second is beyond the pale." He closed his eyes. "I know. You'll need the sigil," she said. She reached into her robe and withdrew a thin blade of gold, no longer than a finger, etched with writing so small it looked like thread. "Press this to the stone at the pale gate. It will open." He took it carefully. "Will the guardian still be there?" She hesitated. "If it remembers." He nodded. "I'm sorry," he said. "For what?" she asked. "For not dying the first time." She smiled, faintly. "No," she said. "Thank you for surviving." He left before dawn. Outside, the city still breathed in sleep, but something beneath the stones trembled. He felt it in his boots. The archive had awakened. Memory had no interest in sleeping again. The road to the Pale was not marked on maps, not anymore. It had once been a great pilgrimage trail, paved with white stones and flanked by shrines. But time had devoured the stone. Ivy had cradled the shrines into ruin, and the path had been surrendered to myth. Leoric rode, now, for the way was long. He had acquired a horse in Vihalmarnot, bought, not stolen, simply gifted by a man who had watched him leave the archive and seemed to know better than to ask questions. The steed was gray, lean, and quiet, with the kind of eyes that had seen too many winters to fear what walked beneath them. It was a wall of stone, smooth, seamless, pale as bone, etched with patterns so faint they were visible only when the light struck from the east. In its center, a hollow no larger than a hand. For days they rode through silence and low, rolling mist. Trees lined the horizon like ghosts too tired to haunt, and birds did not sing beyond the 4th mile. On the 7th night, Leoric came to a field of white stone teeth grave markers, worn flat by wind. No names remained, only a circle of blackened grass in the center. He did not camp there. On the 10th morning, the trail narrowed between 2 cliffs of basalt, and there, between them, stood the pale gate. It was not a door in the traditional sense. Leoric dismounted. The horse did not protest when he let it go. It turned and vanished into the mist without so much as a backward glance. He approached the gate and drew the golden blade from his coat. The writing still shimmered. He pressed it into the hollow. The gate sighed, stone melted to light, and an opening yawned forward, not outward, not inward, but into something else entirely. He stepped through. On the other side was not a cave. Buildings rose like the bones of giants, singular, strange, impossibly tall, and in the distance, a tower of glass and shadow leaned into the wind. It was not forest, not plain, not any place the waking world had room to hold. It was memory given shape, a landscape of silver trees and violet sky. The ground pulsed faintly with light. Her eyes mirrored the sky violet, distant, storm-split. He walked. There were no birds, no beasts, only the low thrum of presence. Then a whisper, not sound, thought, "You have returned." He turned. She stood behind him, the second. Her skin was the color of dusk, her hair bound in copper wire, her robes a cascade of unmarked symbols. "You found the archive," she said. "I remembered," Leoric replied, as if the land had been holding its breath for centuries, and now, finally, had begun to exhale. And Aelreth, awake, free. She said nothing for a long time. Then, "Do you still carry the shard?" He nodded. She extended a hand. She told him what had become of the Pact after he had chosen mercy. The others had scattered, divided by guilt and silence. She had fled to the Pale to keep memory alive in a place untouched by time. The third had fled in another wind to stone, into duty, into violence made holy. He placed it upon her palm. The shard pulsed once, then vanished into her skin. She exhaled, and the world shifted. "I'm used to that, not physically, but beneath the surface of things. The seal is almost undone," she said. "There is one more," he said. "The third," she nodded. "He guards the last door. Will he fight us?" Her smile was slow and full of grief. He never stopped. They walked together beneath the dreaming trees, where memories hung like lanterns. "He will not recognize you," she said. "He has forgotten too deeply. I can make him remember. He won't thank you." Leoric nodded. They reached the base of the glass tower. At its foot, an altar. Upon it, 3 symbols burned faintly. The spiral, the flame, and the eye, to now glowed bright. The third flickered dimly. "We need him," she said. "Where is he?" Her eyes narrowed. "Where all the forgotten go, to the threshold." Leoric breathed in deeply. Then that's where I'll go. She placed a hand over his heart. Take this, she whispered, and a mark burned beneath his ribs, the sigil of the flame, now joined with the eye. You may have to fight him, she said. If I do, Leoric replied, then I hope I lose. He turned, the path ahead, unfolding like a memory waiting to be remembered. Behind him, the pale pulsed once more. The gate did not close. It watched and waited. He passed no inns, no signposts, no camps of shepherds or trade wagons. The air grew thinner the farther he moved from the pale. When his body slowed, he sat against a tree that was not truly a tree, a column of petrified lightland, drifted into memory rather than dream. There he saw the others as they had once been, not colder but emptier, as if the very breath of the world thinned. The closer one came to the bones of forgotten gods. He did not sleep, not as men do. 3 figures standing beneath the sky before the pact was made. Himself, eyes still full of fire, hands clean. The woman from the pale, her gaze always on the horizon. And the third tall, proud, armored in quiet sorrow. His name was once Kellen, a name shaped like a blade, carved in vow. He had been the first to call for the destruction of Aelreth, the first to see only danger in what could not be controlled. Leoric had chosen mercy. The woman had chosen patience. Kellen had chosen certainty, and in doing so had vanished into the threshold, where the world bent inward and memory was kept in chains. Now Leoric followed the path toward that same edge. He came to a valley carved by wind, a bowl of bone-white stone where nothing grew. In its center stood a tower not built but grown, spiraled from black rock like a thorn tearing through the earth. The door was open. He entered. The inside was a hall of mirrors, not glass, not reflection. Memories caught and stilled frozen, as images suspended in crystal. He saw himself in hundreds of poses, a killer's hand, a trembling blade, a child with empty eyes, all true, all fragments. He did not look away. He climbed. A blade rested across his lap, longer than any mortal sword, glowing faintly with power drawn not from flame, but from binding. At the top of the tower, a single room, circular, bare, and at its center, Kellen, still tall, still armored, but no longer entirely human. His flesh had fused with metal. His eyes burned blue with runes too ancient to name. He spoke without looking up. You came late. I wasn't sure you'd still be here. I never left, Kellen said. That was the point. The voice was the same, deeper now, worn by centuries of stillness. I remember, Leoric said. I wish you didn't, Kellen replied. Silence stretched between them. Then Aelreth is awake. I know, Kellen said. I felt it when the seal broke. I came to ask for your peace. Kellen raised his head, and for the first time in all their lifetimes, Leoric saw fear in the man's eyes. I can't give it, he said. You still have it. Kellen's hand drifted to the center of his chest. Beneath the armor, beneath the runes, a single shard of crystal pulsed. The last seal, Kellen said, buried in me. I need it, Leoric said. Kellen stood. Only if you are strong enough. The tower groaned with the movement. I didn't ask to become this. Leoric didn't flinch. Then help me undo it. Kellen drew the blade from his back. Its edge sang with magic. I cannot give it freely, he said. The vow binds me still, or earned, or broken, Leoric asked. The third did not smile. He raised the blade. Leoric did not draw his Instead, he stepped forward. It passed from Kellen's body into Leoric's hand, humming with power and sorrow and all the weight of what had been held for so long, and opened his arms. "Strike me," Kellen hesitated. "This is not a trick," Leoric said. "You're not the jailer. You're the door." The light from Kellen's blade trembled. Leoric pressed his hand to Kellen's chest. "Let it go," he said. "Let it return," and Kellen screamed. Not in pain, in release. The crystal pulsed once, then burst into light. Kellen fell to his knees. His armor cracked, his flesh turned pale again, and he wept. "I remembered," he whispered. Leoric knelt beside him. "I know." They stayed there, two men bent by time, beneath the ceiling of a tower built from the edge of memory. When Kellen stood again, the runes were gone. His eyes were his own. "Where to now?" he asked. Leoric held up the shard. "Now whole. To the place we sealed it." Kellen nodded. "Then let us return. Together." The Tower of the Threshold had no true door, and yet when Kellen stepped out beside Leoric, the world beyond it had changed. Not in form and meaning. The trees bent toward them, though there was no wind. Stones turned pale as they passed, echoing the light now pulsing from the joined shards that Leoric carried in his chest. The sky stretched wide above a deep cobalt basin, holding stars that had no names. It had begun. The three were no longer scattered. They were no longer fragments of a promise. They were the promise itself, walking. Kellen, once the sword. The woman from the Pale, once the eye. Trails that wound not through country or empire, but through the bones of forgotten pacts and ancient vows. These were not places you could find on maps. They had to be remembered. And Leoric, once the flame, together, they moved along the root paths of the old world, and memory now lived in Leoric's blood. He led them, past the Garden of Lanterns, where trees whispered truths to the wind, past the broken stair, where 1,000 ghost footsteps still clung to stone that led nowhere. Until, at last, they stood at the edge of the hollow that was first. It was not Kale's hollow. It was the place from which all hollows had come. A basin so deep that light bent away from it. At its center, a well, and within that well a gate, the original gate, the one they had sealed together, lifetimes ago. It had no lock, only memory. The woman from the Pale stepped forward. She knelt and touched the earth. "I never stopped listening," she whispered, and the ground beneath her glowed. Kellen placed his palm to the hilt of his blade, not to draw it, but to return it, and the air thickened with the weight of his vow, unbound. Leoric stepped forward. The shards within him burned, and then burst free, hovering before the gate like stars torn from constellations. He placed his hand to them, and the gate remembered. It did not open, it awoke. Stones split, not in ruin, but in breath. From within, a figure emerged, not Aelreth. They stepped forward, eyes wide, not in pride, not in power, not exactly. It was Aelreth remade, no longer bound in shadow or fear. Their bodies shimmered with the light of every name they had once carried, every face they had worn in exile. "In awe, you came back," they said. Leoric nodded. "You asked me to." Aelreth knelt. The three did not move. "You remembered," Aelreth whispered. "We all did," Kellen said. "Even me," said the woman. Silence fell not heavy, but reverent. This was not the end of a story, that we would set free what once was bound. This was the middle of it, rediscovered. Aelreth stood. "They will come for us." "Yes," Leoric said. "They already have." "They will call it heresy," Kellen added. "They will call it dangerous," the woman said. because it remembers what they have forgotten. And you? Aelreth asked Leoric. What will you call it? He looked up at the sky, then at the gate, then at his own hands. Truth. They walked back through the gate, not sealed now, but open. Behind them, the hollow shivered, not in fear, in release. And far away, across kingdoms and crumbling empires, across cities, asleep in towers, and children whispering stories to the dark, something changed. Those who felt the shift did not know what it meant, only that something old had opened its eyes and smiled. The moment the gate reopened, the world flinched. In the high courts of glass-paneled capitals, astrologers dropped their starring charts. In temples built on bones, the flames in the sanctum wavered. In the black chambers, where kings whispered secrets to walls older than their thrones, the stone itself grew warm. Something had stirred that was never meant to stir again. And in the hidden towers of the Ascendants, the silent order, who had once sworn to keep the Pact broken candles, extinguished themselves without wind. They knew the Triad had returned. A letter, sealed with wax, the color of dried blood, was sent by pigeon, by whisper, by dream. It reached every agent loyal to the memory of silence. Aelreth walked the earth again. The first order came from the south, where gold flowed thicker than rivers, and spies outnumbered soldiers. Kill the flame. Break the circle. Seal the memory again. But Leoric was no longer flame alone. He was the joined memory of all three. And he was no longer hiding. No guards raised weapons. No alarms sounded because, before they arrived, the old stones of the wall had whispered their names. He and the others moved northward, now not as fugitives, but as witnesses, not to conquer, not to destroy, but to walk the world they had once bled for, and to remind it of the story it had buried beneath time and fear. In the city of Windcrest, they passed through open gates. In the village of Mournstone, the children gathered to hear Aelreth speak, not in command, not in prophecy, but in story, of rivers that forgot how to flow, of trees that remembered the names of stars, of mercy once offered, now fulfilled. And in a ruined keep on the edge of the western cliffs, Kellen stood beneath a shattered banner. Once his hand laid down the last of his armor. I wore it to remember, he said to the wind, but it remembered me too much. He let it fall into the sea. In secret rooms, the Ascendants watched. Some called for war, others called for hesitation, but none of them could deny that something had shifted, that memory no longer bent to them alone. One among them, old woman, with eyes that had not closed in 40 years, spoke first. They are not enemies, she said. They are what we were before we grew afraid. No one answered her, because, in truth, they had all heard it too. That low, distant hum, the sound of the world remembering itself. But not all were content to watch. From the eastern wastes came a man named Aelreth, once a prince, once a prophet, now something else. He wore armor made from prayers and teeth. He carried a staff wound in the hair of martyrs. And fire is beautiful before it consumes you. And he claimed the voice of the earth spoke through him. When news of Aelreth's return reached him, he wept, then laughed, then raised an army, not of soldiers, of believers. They are the fire, he preached. His banners bore no sigils, only a circle broken by a single unblinking eye. As Leoric and the others passed through the vale of whispering Salta Place, where no birds flew and even the rivers ran quiet, Kellen sensed it first. We're being watched. The woman nodded. not by beasts, not by spies. Leoric touched the hilt of his blade, not to draw it, but to feel its weight. "They're not hunting us," he said. "No," Aelreth murmured. "They're waiting." At the mouth of the vale stood a single figure, not armored, not cloaked, a child, but not a child. Eyes old, bones too straight, and in their palm a shard of crystal, unbound, unclaimed. Leoric stepped forward. The child smiled. "He sent me," they said. "Who?" Leoric asked Aelreth. Leoric took the shard. It pulsed once, and the sky darkened, not with storm, with memory. The child vanished, not in light, in silence, and the shard began to speak, not in words, but in truth. Aelreth gasped. Kellen fell to one knee. The woman covered her mouth, because the shard did not carry history. It carried prophecy, and it showed them what Aelreth had seen. A firestorm of minds burning, a field of mirrors shattering, a tower made of bone, and at the center a door, not sealed, not guarded, open and waiting. The shard's vision had passed, but its echo remained. They camped that night in a circle of ancient standing stones, black with age and veined with silver, humming with energies none of them spoke aloud. The air was warm, but no fire was lit. Not even Aelreth wished to invite more light than necessary. For the first time since their reunion, they were quiet. Even Kellen, even the woman from the Pale, who had always been the first to ask what came next. Leoric sat with his back to the largest stone, the shard resting in his palm, pulsing like a slow heart. He hadn't closed his eyes since the child handed it to him. "Why does he want it open?" Kellen asked, finally breaking the silence. "Because he believes the world cannot survive as it is," said the woman. "Something buried in the door, not just knowledge, not just memory, power." Leoric looked into the shard's faint glow. "Then he's no different from those who sealed me," Aelreth said. "He fears what he does not control." "No," Leoric said. "He reveres it." Kellen frowned. "That's worse." The woman knelt beside Leoric. "We made the pact to protect the world from what we could not destroy. But we also made it to protect what the world could become," Leoric replied. "That was your reason, and yours was mercy," she said softly. "And Kellen's was order," Aelreth added. Kellen shook his head. "I thought it was truth. I see now. It was fear." They stood together then, for now no longer triad, alone. The pact had changed, grown, lived. "Do we go to him?" Aelreth asked. Leoric looked north, toward the horizon, where thunder gathered like breath behind mountains. "We don't go to him." He pointed to the shard. "He's coming to us." And come he did. Clouds bent in a slow spiral above the mountains. In the distance, drums. By morning, the air was thick with pressure, a wind without source, not of war. They chanted not names, not commands, just sound, a tidal wave of belief, of pilgrimage. His eyes were wide and bright, and he smiled the way men do when they believe nothing can undo them. Thousands marched, some with weapons, most with symbols painted on their skin, foreheads marked with the broken circle and the eye. Leoric and the others did not hide. They stood atop a narrow hill, flanked by trees that had once marked a border between kingdoms, now forgotten. At midday, the front line arrived. At its center Aelreth. He was tall, cloaked in layered robes, stitched with oaths. "I feared I'd missed you," he said. "I only need to trust that it is older, wiser, and more deserving than we are. Then we learn." "You came fast," Leoric replied. "The world turns quickly when the past refuses to stay buried." "Why are you here?" asked Kellen. To finish what you began, Aelreth said, nodding at Aelreth, to open the door fully, not sealed, not broken into pieces. You don't understand what's behind it, the woman warned. I don't have to, Aelreth said. Aelreth smiled again. A silence passed between them. Then Aelreth held out his hand. In your chest, you carry the last key, he said. Give it. Join me. And together we will bring the world to remembering. Leoric did not move. You wish to return to the first light, Aelreth said. I offer you that, but not hidden. He looked to Aelreth, and you who were silenced. I would let you speak, then to Kellen. You who broke yourself for duty, I would make you whole again. Then to the woman. The offer hung in the air like a thread stretched to breaking. Leoric reached to his chest. His fingers closed over the shard embedded in his skin. Then he said, simply, no. The sky cracked, not with storm, with consequence. Aelreth's smile faded. You would keep the door closed, he asked. No, Leoric said, but I will not open it for you. The shard flared. So did the stones around them. The very ground seemed to hold its breath. And Aelreth's voice dropped to a whisper. Then you are the seal now. Yes, Leoric said, and so are they. He drew the blade he had not touched in days. It burned gold, not with rage, with memory. Kellen stepped beside him, his palms glowing. The woman raised her hand. The wind answered. Aelreth closed their eyes, and from the earth itself, light rose, a ring of it, a circle, unbroken. And Aelreth took a step back, because in that moment he saw it. Not a rebellion, not a return, but a remembering of the first pact, of the first fire, of the door that was never truly closed, and the guardians who had never truly left. Time stretched not forward, but outward, like breath held on the edge of something final. The earth beneath Leoric trembled with the weight of all that had passed. Pacts made, betrayals endured, silence kept. The shard in his chest burned, now not with pain, but with clarity. It pulsed with every moment he had denied, every path he had forgotten. It was no longer just a key. It was the whole story. His, theirs, the world's. Before him, Aelreth stood in grim stillness. Behind them, 1,000 followers watched, cloaked in silence. Their faces were not angry, not afraid. They were waiting, not for battle, but for truth. Still, Leoric did not raise his blade. I am not your enemy, he said. Aelreth's voice was tight. You are the lock. No, said the woman from the pale, her voice like snow falling on stone. He is the door. Kellen stepped forward. And we all are the threshold. Then came Aelreth's voice, threading through the breath between thoughts. It pulsed, alive with silence and breath. At its center, a doorway, no hinges, no frame. Just light that rippled like slow-moving water. It was made not of magic, but of all they had buried. It was not loud, not soft, but vast. We were never meant to seal the world, only to remind it. Not all things forgotten should stay lost. The sky above them shifted. It deepened into a color that defied name. And stars began to throb in rhythm with the shard in Leoric's chest. Light spilled from cracks in the air, not summoned, but remembered. The gate began to form, not as structure, but as memory made visible. Where there had been nothing now rose a towering arch of black stone and bone. The original gate, the shard in his chest, beat faster like a heart remembering its own birth. They did not touch the threshold. His armor, etched with age and battles, fell away piece by piece, rusted then dust, not with force, but choice. Each plate, a burden laid down, they bowed. The light widened, not in brightness, but in invitation. Kellen followed. He placed one palm on the arch, a memory, trapped, a lullaby, her mother's last gift. She placed it in the center of the arch. It rang once, clear as wind chimes in frost. The woman from the pail stepped forward next. In her hand, a single crystal pindelicate and old, then vanished. Only space, silent, endless, lit with veins of golden light that pulsed outward in every direction, like rivers across time. Leoric was last. He stood before the gate. Wind spiraled around him. Leaves scattered, then hung weightless in the air. A question filled him. Not, "Are you ready?" but, "Are you still willing?" He stepped forward. Ferreth's voice broke the silence. "If you cross... the world changes." Leoric turned. His voice was low, steady. "It already has." He walked through, and the gate did not close. Because it had never truly closed. It hovered, spun once, then joined the light. It had only waited for memory. On the other side, there was no throne, no ending, no heaven or judgment. This was the center, the heart of the pact, the breath between creation and forgetting. Figures stood there, uncountable, shimmering, watching, the first witnesses, the shapers of silence, the watchers of thresholds. Some bore faces Leoric nearly recognized. Some had no faces at all. His hands trembled, and his voice cracked not from grief, but from release. Aelreth joined them, then Kellen, then the woman. Each one stepped not into a role, but into remembrance. And Leoric stood in the center. The shard lifted from his chest, like steam rising from warm earth, and the world exhaled, not ended, not reborn, simply remembered. The gate remained, not as a seal, as a promise. Far below, in the waking world, Verith fell to his knees. He wept, and in that weeping, something long frozen within him softened, not broken, unbound. He rose, slower than before. He looked up at the sky, now lit with threads of memory, a shimmer, not a wound in the world. A memory, open, he whispered, "I remember," and turned not away from the gate, but toward the people behind him. To speak, to teach, to begin, in time, stories would spread. Some would say gods had returned, others that judgment had passed, but the quiet ones would tell it true. The returning of a name, the remembering of a vow, the reopening of a door long forgotten, and of the man who had once been shadow, once silence, once assassin, now the first light, and the flame that chose mercy again and again and again.